The early morning sun painted soft shadows across the command deck of the Earth Defense Station Orbital 7. Commander Lisa Bennett stood at her post, her blue eyes fixed on the massive display screen that wrapped around the circular room. Her morning had started like any other until the sensors picked up something unusual at the edge of the solar system. "Commander, we're getting strange readings from beyond Neptune's orbit," said Officer Ryan Brown, his fingers dancing across the holographic controls. "It's like nothing we've ever seen before." Lisa leaned forward, her dark hair falling over her shoulders as she studied the data. The energy signatures were massive, far beyond anything Earth's technology could produce. As she watched, more signatures appeared, blinking into existence like stars emerging at dusk. "Get me a direct line to Earth Command," she ordered, her voice steady despite the growing unease in her stomach. "And someone wake up Dr. Amy Foster from the Xenobiology Department." Before anyone could act on her orders, the station's communication system crackled to life. A voice, seemingly made of multiple tones speaking at once, filled the command deck. "Attention primitive species of Sol 3. This is High Speaker Vex of the Galactic Council. Your isolation period has ended. Prepare for evaluation and integration." The crew froze, their faces pale in the blue light of their screens. First contact. After centuries of wondering, questioning, and searching the stars, aliens had finally revealed themselves. But something in that voice, something in those words, made Lisa's military instincts scream danger. Within hours, Earth's governments scrambled to respond. Ambassador Peter Clark was chosen to speak for humanity, and Lisa's station became the focal point for this historic meeting. The ambassador arrived with a small team of diplomats and linguists, his gray suit pristine and his manner calm despite the circumstances. "Commander Bennett," he greeted her with a firm handshake. "Any new developments?" "They've been silent since their first message, sir. But more ships keep appearing. We've counted over 300 vessels now, all larger than anything we've ever built." Peter nodded, his expression grave. "Well, let's hope they're here for peaceful dialogue." The answer came soon enough. When the Council's representatives finally appeared on the station's screens, Lisa felt her heart sink. The aliens, the Zaxthar, looked like tall, spindly creatures with iridescent scales and multiple eyes arranged in geometric patterns. But it was their attitude that set off warning bells. "Your species has been under observation for the past 1,000 years," High Speaker Vex announced, its multiple eyes blinking in an unsettling pattern. "Your development has been disappointing. Your tendency toward violence and unpredictable behavior makes you unsuitable for full council membership." Ambassador Clark stepped forward, his voice diplomatic but firm. "With respect, High Speaker, humanity has made great strides in peace and technological advancement. We would welcome the opportunity to learn from—" Silence. The High Speaker cut him off. "We have actively worked to slow your technological progress through subtle intervention. Your species was meant to develop along approved paths. Instead, you continue to show dangerous levels of creativity and martial tendency." The revelation hit Lisa like a physical blow. All those mysterious setbacks in space development, the odd failures in certain scientific fields, it hadn't been bad luck. They'd been sabotage. "You will submit to council authority," Vex continued. "Your military forces will be disbanded. Your educational systems will be restructured. Your cultural practices will be modified to meet council standards." Peter Clark's diplomatic mask cracked slightly. "And if we refuse?" The High Speaker's eyes shifted to a deep red color. "Then the council will have no choice but to remove the human variable from the equation. You have 48 standard hours to begin surrender procedures." As the transmission ended, Lisa turned to the ambassador. "Sir, they're positioning their ships around every major orbital installation we have. This isn't a negotiation, it's an ultimatum." Peter's face had gone hard, the diplomat replaced by something older and more determined. "Get me Earth Command. Now. And Commander, begin calculating evacuation routes for every civilian station in orbit. Something tells me we're about to need them." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. As Lisa coordinated with other orbital stations and military installations, reports began coming in from around the solar system. The Council ships had appeared everywhere, from Mars to Jupiter's moons. Each carried the same message: submit or die. Earth's response was building. Military vessels moved into defensive positions. Ground-based weapon systems came online. But as Lisa watched the tactical displays, she knew they were outgunned. The Council's ships carried energy readings that made Earth's most powerful weapons look like toys. "Commander," Officer Brown called out, his voice tense. "They're scanning us. Deep scans of every installation, every ship, even the planet's surface." Lisa nodded grimly. "Let them look. And make sure you record everything they do. If we're going to find a way out of this, we need to understand what we're dealing with." As the first day of first contact drew to a close, Lisa stood at her favorite viewing port, watching Earth spin below. The planet looked peaceful from up here, all blue oceans and swirling white clouds. Hard to believe that in less than 2 days, it might all be gone. Her tablet beeped with a message from Earth Command. New orders, marked urgent. As she read them, a small smile crept across her face. "Brown," she called out, "get me everything we have on traditional military ceremonies, particularly anything involving coordinated movement." "Mom." He looked confused. "Just do it. And send word to Dr. Foster. Tell her I need everything she can find about Council species' neurological responses to rhythmic patterns." If the Council wanted to see humanity's primitive side, Lisa thought, maybe it was time to show them exactly what ancient human traditions could do. After all, every culture on Earth had its war dances, its battle rhythms. And if she was reading these preliminary scans right, the Council species had never developed anything similar. As night fell over her side of Earth, Lisa Bennett began planning humanity's response to the Council's ultimatum. It wouldn't be the answer they were expecting. But then again, according to their own words, unexpected was what humans did best. The Council had spent centuries trying to make humanity dance to their tune. Now it was time to show them how humans really danced. Admiral Kevin Morris stood before the combined military leadership of Earth in the underground command center beneath the Rocky Mountains. The massive screens behind him showed the positions of Council ships, now numbering over 1,000, spread throughout the solar system. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his weathered face serious but his eyes bright with purpose, "Dr. Amanda Wright has made a discovery that changes everything." Dr. Wright stepped forward, her red hair pulled back in a neat bun. She tapped her tablet, and the screen shifted to show neurological scans of various Council species. "Their brains are different from ours in one crucial way," she explained. "They never developed the neural pathways associated with rhythmic movement. In their entire history, not one Council species ever created dance." The room filled with murmurs of discussion. Admiral Morris raised his hand for silence. "What Dr. Wright discovered goes deeper. The Council species can't process complex rhythmic patterns effectively. Their combat doctrine is completely linear: attack, defend, retreat. No variation, no improvisation." Lieutenant Daniel Hughes, a former dance instructor turned tactical officer, spoke up from his seat. "Are you suggesting what I think you are, sir?" Morris smiled. "Operation War Dance is already in motion. We're going to fight them using something they've never seen before: coordinated battle rhythms based on humanity's oldest traditions." The next 12 hours transformed Earth's military. Under Lieutenant Hughes's guidance, ship crews learned to move their vessels in flowing patterns based on ancient war dances. Ground forces practiced synchronized combat maneuvers that looked like ritual displays but contained deadly purpose. On the orbital station, Dr. Wright worked with Commander Bennett to implement the new strategies. "Look at this," she pointed to a sensor reading. "When our ships started moving in dance patterns during the test run, the Council vessels actually backed away. They couldn't predict our movements." In space, the first real test came at Mars orbit. Lieutenant Hughes led a small group of ships in what appeared to be a ceremonial display. The council vessels watched, their sensors indicating confusion at the seemingly primitive behavior. "Begin the dance," Hughes ordered his crews. The Earth ships moved in perfect synchronization, their patterns based on the ghost dance of the Native American traditions. To the council observers, it looked like a strange ritual. They didn't realize they were watching a complex attack formation until it was too late. 3 council ships fell in the first pass. The humans moved their vessels in flowing, unpredictable patterns, striking from angles the council's rigid tactical systems couldn't anticipate. The remaining alien ships tried to respond with their standard maneuvers, but against the fluid motion of the human assault, they might as well have been standing still. "Keep the rhythm," Hughes called out as his ships spun through space in deadly ballet. "Let them see our primitive display." Back on Earth, Admiral Morris watched the sensor feeds with satisfaction. "Send the footage to all Earth forces," he ordered. "Show them how it's done." The Council's response came swiftly. High-speaker Vex's voice boomed through communication channels. "This primitive display of ritual combat does not change the Council's decision. You have 24 hours remaining to surrender." But something had changed. The Council ships began maintaining greater distances from Earth vessels. Their formations became more hesitant, less certain. They couldn't understand what they were seeing, and that made them cautious. Dr. Wright worked through the night, analyzing the Council's reactions. "Their entire civilization is based on predictability," she explained to Morris. "They literally cannot comprehend why anyone would move in patterns that don't follow their logical progressions." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Officer Ryan Brown, still working on Commander Bennett's station, discovered that certain frequencies of drumbeat-like signals confused the Council's sensor systems. "They're like a person with no sense of rhythm trying to predict a dance move," he explained. "Their computers try to calculate our next position based on previous movements, but the patterns we're using don't follow their mathematical logic." Admiral Morris immediately ordered all Earth ships to incorporate the drum signals into their communications. To Council monitoring systems, it sounded like primitive percussion instruments. In reality, it was a sophisticated combat coordination system they couldn't decode. Lieutenant Hughes led another attack, this time against a larger Council fleet near Jupiter. His ships moved in patterns based on African war dances, their movements appearing chaotic to the aliens, but perfectly coordinated to human eyes. "Watch how they bunch up," he told his crews. "They can only think in straight lines and fixed formations. Show them how humans dance." The battle that followed would later be called the Jupiter Waltz by Earth forces. Human ships spun and weaved through space, their movements coordinated by drumbeat communications. Council vessels, trying to maintain their rigid formations, found themselves tangled in their own defensive patterns. When it was over, 17 Council ships had been destroyed. The human fleet had suffered only minor damage. More importantly, the Council's aura of invincibility had been shattered. As the second day of the ultimatum drew to a close, Admiral Morris received word that other species were watching. Several races that the Council had subjugated began reaching out secretly to Earth, fascinated by the humans' ability to confound their oppressors. "Sir," Lieutenant Hughes reported, "we're getting requests from some of these species. They want to learn our war dances." Morris looked at the tactical display, where Council ships were now maintaining careful distances from Earth vessels. Their neat, orderly formations seemed stiff and vulnerable compared to the fluid movements of the human fleet. "Teach them," he ordered. "Show them how humanity dances when we're fighting for our lives." As the final hours of the Council's ultimatum ticked away, Earth's forces continued to move in their deadly dances through space. They had taken what the Council saw as primitive ritual and turned it into something the supposedly superior aliens could encounter. The war dance had begun, and Council space was about to learn why humans had kept these ancient traditions alive for so many thousands of years. They were about to learn that sometimes the oldest ways of fighting could overcome the most advanced technology. and they were about to learn what happened when humanity decided to dance. Chaos erupted throughout Council space as human battle groups moved in their mesmerizing patterns. Captain Susan Martinez stood on the bridge of her ship, the Northern Star, watching as her fleet performed complex maneuvers based on traditional Native American snake dances. "Keep the rhythm steady," she commanded, her voice calm as her ships wound through the debris of fallen Council vessels. "Let them chase our shadows." The Council's response to humanity's unusual combat style had turned from dismissive to desperate. Their rigid military doctrine, developed over thousands of years, had no answer for the fluid movements of Earth's forces. In her laboratory aboard the orbital station, Dr. William Parker made a breakthrough that would change the course of the war. He had been studying Council physiology, trying to understand why they couldn't adapt to human battle patterns. Their inner ear structure, he explained to Commander Bennett over a secure channel. They physically can't process complex rhythmic movements without becoming disoriented. It's not just cultural, it's biological. This discovery spread quickly through Earth's forces. Ship captains began incorporating more complex dance patterns into their attack formations, deliberately triggering the Council species' physical weakness. What had started as a clever tactical innovation became a devastating advantage. The Council's civilian populations watched in growing fear as human ships danced through their most secure systems. Council propaganda had always portrayed humans as primitive, violent creatures. Now those primitives were dismantling the Council's defense networks with movements that looked more like art than warfare. On a Council colony world called Nexus Prime, a group of enslaved species watched the humans with growing hope. The Merethi, a race of graceful beings who had been conquered centuries ago, recognized something familiar in the humans' battle patterns. "We once danced too," their elder told Captain Martinez during a secret meeting. "The Council made us stop, said it was primitive, uncivilized." Martinez listened as more subjugated species came forward, each sharing stories of how the Council had stripped away their cultural traditions, especially those involving rhythmic movement. She sent a message back to Earth Command. "We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore." Admiral Morris received her message while coordinating attacks across 3 star systems. The human fleets had adapted their tactics, now incorporating dance elements from Earth's various cultures into their combat strategies. Chinese rhythm dances became the basis for complex missile evasion patterns. African drum rhythms coordinated multi-ship strikes. Hawaiian hula movements inspired new ways to navigate asteroid fields. The Council thought they could erase these traditions from the galaxy, he told his staff. Instead, they're about to see them used to dismantle their empire. The Zaxthar leadership, watching their mighty fleets fall to what they saw as primitive ritual combat, couldn't comprehend their failure. High Speaker Vex called an emergency session of the Council. "These humans," it said, multiple eyes blinking in distress, "they move wrong. Their ships move wrong. Nothing follows the proper patterns. Nothing makes sense." But something was making sense to the subjugated species watching the war unfold. One by one, they began to remember their own ancient traditions of movement and rhythm. The Council had forced them to forget, but seeing humans use similar techniques in battle awakened something long dormant. On the edge of Council space, the Northern Star led a fleet in what appeared to be a complex ceremonial dance. Council sensors tried to track their movements, to predict their attack vectors, but the patterns defied their logical analysis. "They're trying to calculate where we'll be," Martinez told her crew as they wove between enemy ships. "Show them that not everything can be reduced to numbers." The battle that followed became known as the Dance of Liberation. Human ships moved in patterns based on traditional waltzes, their seemingly chaotic movements disguising precisely planned attacks. Council vessels, their crews suffering from vertigo induced by trying to track the humans' movements, fell one after another. As news of the battle spread, more conquered species began to revel. They watched recordings of human ships dancing through space and remembered their own lost traditions. The Council's grip on their empire began to slip. Dr. Parker continued his research. working with scientists from newly liberated worlds. Together, they discovered that the Council had specifically chosen to conquer species that showed neural adaptations for rhythmic movement, seeing it as a sign of primitive development. They didn't just hate dance, he reported to Earth Command. They feared it, because it represented something they could never understand: the ability to move in ways that couldn't be predicted by pure logic. The war's turning point came during the Battle of the Seven Stars. 7 human fleets, each moving in patterns drawn from different Earth cultures, converged on a major Council stronghold. The defenders, unable to track the complex movements, could only watch as their supposedly superior forces were systematically dismantled. "Look at how they freeze," Lieutenant Hughes observed during the battle. "Their ships just stop when they can't predict our next move. They'd rather do nothing than risk doing something wrong." As the third month of war drew to a close, Council space was in turmoil. More than a dozen subjugated species had risen in revolt, many adapting human battle dances to their own ancient traditions. The Council's perfectly ordered society was falling apart, undone by the very primitive behaviors they had tried to suppress. Admiral Morris received a message from the Marathi Elder. "Your people have taught us to dance again. The Council cannot stop the music now." He smiled as he watched the tactical displays, where human ships continued their deadly ballet through space. The Council had spent centuries trying to impose their rigid order on the galaxy. They never understood that sometimes the most powerful forces in the universe moved to rhythms that logic couldn't comprehend. And humanity was teaching the galaxy to dance again. Major John Cooper led his strike force toward the Council's central command structure, a massive space station that hung like a metallic spider in the void. His ships moved in perfect synchronization, their patterns based on traditional Irish step dances. All ships maintained formation, he ordered as they approached the outer defense grid. "Lieutenant Maria Barnes, begin the drum sequence." Lieutenant Barnes, who had revolutionized space combat communications with her drumbeat-based codes, started broadcasting complex rhythmic signals. To the Council's monitoring systems, it sounded like primitive percussion instruments. In reality, it was a sophisticated battle coordination system that the aliens couldn't crack. "They still can't decode our drum speak," Barnes reported with satisfaction. "Their computers keep classifying it as cultural noise." The Council's defense fleet responded to their approach with typical rigid formations. After months of warfare, they still hadn't adapted to humanity's fluid combat style. Their ships arranged themselves in perfect geometric patterns, exactly as their tactical doctrine demanded. "Watch how they bunch up," Cooper told his crews. "They're still fighting the way they did when the war started. They can't change their patterns. They can only try to perfect them." The battle began with what looked like a ceremonial display. Cooper's ships performed complex spirals and weaves, movements that seemed random to Council observers, but followed the precise steps of ancient dances. The Council commanders, unable to predict where the human ships would move next, held their positions and waited for attacks that would follow logical patterns. They were still waiting when Cooper's fleet tore through their formations. "Keep the rhythm," he called as his ships spun through the enemy fleet. "Let them see what Earth's oldest traditions can do to their perfect order." The Council's command station watched in growing alarm as their defensive screen collapsed. High Commander Zex, the station's leader, demanded explanations from its tactical officers. "How are they doing this?" it asked, multiple eyes flickering in distress. "Where is the logic in their movements?" But there was logic, just not the kind the Council could understand. Every spin and twist of the human ships followed patterns that had been refined over thousands of years of human cultural development. Each movement connected to the next in a flow that seemed chaotic to alien eyes, but made perfect sense to human minds. As Cooper's fleet engaged the station's inner defenses, more Earth ships arrived. They came in waves, each group moving to different cultural rhythms. Some followed the flowing patterns of Tai Chi, others the sharp precision of ballet, still others the tribal dances of ancient Africa. Lieutenant Barnes coordinated their movements with her drum codes, sending complex instructions hidden within what seemed like primitive beating. The Council's most sophisticated codebreakers tried to decipher the signals, but found nothing they could understand. "They're still trying to find mathematical patterns in our drums," she told Cooper. "They can't accept that we're using rhythms older than their civilization to coordinate modern space combat." The Council's rigid military doctrine began to fall apart as more human ships arrived. Their defenders tried to maintain their perfect formations, even as Earth vessels danced through their lines, striking from impossible angles and vanishing before they could respond. "Look at that," Barnes pointed to her tactical display. "They're starting to shoot at shadows. Any movement they don't understand is becoming a threat to them." Cooper watched as Council ships fired at empty space, their crews so disturbed by the humans' unpredictable movements that they were seeing attacks where none existed. The perfect order of their military was crumbling in the face of humanity's controlled chaos. Inside the command station, High Commander Zex received reports of more Earth fleets approaching. Each group moved differently, yet all moved together in ways that defied the Council's tactical analysis. "Shut down the visual feeds," it ordered desperately. "Their movements, they hurt to watch. Nothing should move like that. Nothing." But turning off the screens didn't help. Human ships had already breached the station's outer defenses, moving in patterns based on Native American ghost dances. The Council's inner defense fleet tried to respond, but found themselves tangled in their own rigid formations. "They're breaking," Barnes reported as she monitored the enemy communications. "Their command structure can't handle what we're doing. They need orders for everything, but their commanders can't process our movements fast enough to give those orders." Cooper led his ships closer to the station, their movements now following the complex patterns of classical waltz. To human eyes, it was beautiful, a deadly dance through space. To the Council observers, it was a nightmare of unpredictability that their minds couldn't process. The station's defenses began to fall. Council ships, unable to coordinate against the humans' fluid attacks, either retreated or were destroyed. Centuries of military doctrine, based on perfect order and predictability, proved useless against combat techniques drawn from humanity's most ancient traditions. As the battle reached its peak, Cooper received a message from Earth Command. More Council worlds were in revolt. The sight of human ships dancing through space had awakened something in the subjugated species, memories of their own cultural traditions that the Council had forced them to abandon. "Sir," Barnes called out, "we're receiving transmissions from inside the station. Some of the slave species they used for labor. They're dancing. Actually dancing in the corridors. The Council security forces can't stop them because the movements make them dizzy." Cooper smiled as he watched the massive station's defenses crumble. The Council had spent centuries trying to impose their version of perfect order on the galaxy. They had dismissed dance as primitive, rhythmic movement as uncivilized. Now those same primitive traditions were destroying everything they had built. "All ships," he ordered, "prepare for final approach. Show them humanity's oldest war dance one more time." As his fleet moved in for the killing blow, Cooper thought about how the Council's greatest weakness had turned out to be their inability to understand what they considered primitive. They had never grasped that sometimes the oldest ways of moving, of fighting, of being, carried power that no amount of technological advancement could match. They had called humanity primitive for keeping these traditions alive. Now those same traditions were about to bring their empire down. Admiral Kevin Morris stood at the command center of the combined Earth fleet, watching as thousands of human ships gathered for the largest coordinated battle in history. The Council's homeworld loomed ahead, its orbital defenses bristling with weapons. "All fleet commanders," he broadcast, "begin your approach sequences. Show them every dance Earth has ever known." The massive human fleet began to move, each battle group following different traditional patterns. Some spun in Celtic spirals, others flowed in Southeast Asian temple dance formations, while still others performed complex movements based on Brazilian capoeira. Commander Lisa Bennett, now leading her own fleet, guided her ships through patterns inspired by classical ballet. "Look at them trying to track us," she told her crews. "Their sensors are going crazy trying to predict where we'll be next." The Council's homeworld defense fleet responded exactly as their doctrine demanded, with perfect geometric formations and mathematically precise maneuvers. After months of war, they still couldn't adapt to humanity's fluid combat style. They never learned, Dr. William Parker observed from his research station. They couldn't change because their entire civilization is built on predictability. Dance is the opposite of everything they believe in. The first wave of Earth ships engaged the outer defense grid. Lieutenant Maria Barnes coordinated their movements with complex drum code signals, turning space combat into a deadly performance. Council ships tried to maintain their formations, but found themselves surrounded by movements they couldn't understand or predict. On the Council homeworld, High Speaker Vex watched in horror as the human fleet danced through their best defenses. "Stop them," it commanded. "Their movements make no sense. They violate every principle of proper combat." But that was exactly why the humans were winning. Every attempt by Council forces to impose order on the battle failed as Earth ships moved in patterns refined by thousands of years of human cultural evolution. The second wave of human ships arrived, led by Captain Susan Martinez. Her fleet moved in formations based on traditional Japanese fan dances, their attacks flowing like silk in the wind. Council defenders, trying to track their movements, found their targeting systems confused by patterns that defied logical analysis. "They're still trying to fight by their rulebook," Martinez reported as her ships broke through another defense line. "They can't accept that we're not playing their game anymore." Admiral Morris watched as more Earth fleets joined the battle. Each group added their own cultural dances to the massive performance, turning space around the Council homeworld into a swirling canvas of human movement traditions. The Council's rigid military doctrine began to collapse. Their ships, unable to coordinate against the humans' fluid attacks, started firing randomly into space. The perfect order they had maintained for centuries was dissolving into chaos. "This is humanity's greatest performance," Morris told his crews. "Every dance our species has ever created, every rhythm we've ever found, every movement we've ever celebrated. It's all here, right now." Commander Bennett led her fleet closer to the planet, their formations now incorporating elements from African tribal dances. The Council's inner defense fleet tried to respond, but found themselves trapped by their own predictable tactics. "They're breaking formation," Bennett reported. "Their whole command structure is falling apart. They can't handle seeing their perfect order turned into chaos." On the planet below, the Council's leadership watched their defenses crumble. Centuries of enforcing rigid patterns of behavior had left them unable to adapt when faced with humanity's fluid combat style. "How can they move like this?" High Speaker Vex demanded as it watched the battle unfold. "It defies all logical progression, all proper order." But that was exactly what dance had always done. Defied logic, created beauty from chaos, turned movement into art. The Council had spent millennia trying to eliminate such unpredictability from the galaxy. Now it was destroying them. The final assault began as Earth's combined fleet performed the largest coordinated dance movement in human history. Thousands of ships moved in perfect harmony, each following their own cultural traditions while contributing to a greater pattern. Lieutenant Barnes's drum codes coordinated their movements, turning space combat into a symphony of rhythm and motion. The Council's remaining ships, their crews suffering from vertigo induced by trying to track the humans' movements, began to retreat. "The planet's defenses are down," Bennett reported. "Their entire military structure is in chaos. They can't coordinate anything because they can't predict where we'll be from one moment to the next." Admiral Morris led the final push toward the Council's Central Command complex. "Show them one last dance," he ordered. "Let them see what they tried to eliminate from the galaxy." The human fleet moved in, each ship following patterns that had been passed down through generations. What the Council had dismissed as primitive ritual had become the instrument of their destruction. In the Council's chambers, High Speaker Vex watched as human ships danced through the last of their defenses. "We were wrong," it said finally. "We thought order was the highest form of civilization. We never understood. We never could understand." The war ended not with a bang, but with a dance. The Council's leadership, faced with the complete collapse of their military doctrine, surrendered unconditionally. Their perfect order had been undone by the very traditions they had tried to suppress. Admiral Morris stood on his bridge, watching as Earth ships continued their fluid movements around the conquered planet. "Let this be remembered," he told his crews. "When the galaxy needed saving, humanity didn't just fight. We danced." And so the Council's rule ended, defeated by the most ancient of human traditions. They had tried to impose their version of civilization on the galaxy, never understanding that true civilization embraced both order and chaos, both logic and art. They had called humanity primitive for keeping their dances alive. In the end, those same dances had freed the galaxy, and in the space around the former Council homeworld, human ships continued to dance, celebrating victory in the oldest way their species knew how, with movement that defied prediction, with rhythm that defied control, with joy that defied understanding. The war dance was complete, and the galaxy would never be the same.